Gaddafi knew this was madness. He invested billions into desert agriculture, aquifers, local grain reserves. He said a nation that cannot feed itself is a nation waiting to be conquered. And tell the IMF we won't starve to pay debts.
When we think of colonialism in the continent of Africa, my first thought is things like mineral resource extraction, military coups, slavery, the Berlin Conference, where they divided up the continent into different countries for Europe's control. There is a major part of colonialism that persists today, and it is to do with food and agriculture. And I didn't know much about this up until recently. And so in this video, we're going to use the words of Moussa Ibrahim to talk about food and agriculture colonialism in the modern era. Thank you so much for clicking on this video today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is TJ. I'm Nigerian and British mixed. And on this channel, we talk about African geopolitics. So Moussa Ibrahim is a former advisor for Gaddafi of Libya. By all accounts, they were friends, and he was in charge of information. He was the information minister for Libya. And in this particular video, he talks about agriculture, food security, and how it's tied to neocolonial economic practices.
Africa holds 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. 60%. And yet we import $43 billion in food every year. Why? Because colonial economics never left. We were taught to export cash crops, tea, coffee, cocoa, not feed ourselves. Gaddafi knew this was madness. He invested billions into desert agriculture, aquifers, local grain reserves. He said a nation that cannot feed itself is a nation waiting to be conquered. And he was right. Today, every fertile nation like Nigeria import rice. Malawi relies on maize aid. Senegal buys onions from Holland. And the World Bank tells us this is market efficiency. Nope, it's economic suicide. To reclaim our dignity, we must reclaim our soil. That starts with land reform. Give land to those who work it, not foreign agro businesses, not local elites. Then invest agro processing, irrigation, grain storage, pharma cooperatives. Ban GMO monopolies, protect seeds, promote native crops. Food is political. It determines whether our children grow or go hungry, whether farmers thrive or migrate, whether we feed our own workers or foreign traders. Let's build continental food corridors, share science across borders, train a new generation of agroecologists, and tell the IMF we won't starve to pay debts. Because the real revolution begins in the fields, and the future of Africa won't be decided in a boardroom. It will be decided in the soil.
So the first wow stat that should jump out at you is that the continent of Africa has 60% of the world's arable land. That is a huge amount to be concentrated on one single continent. And it seems that the colonialists understood this and needed to specifically go after the way Africans use that arable land for its production to ensure their food security rather than the continent of Africa's food security. We know about raw exports of minerals, but raw exports of agriculture, things like cocoa, coffee, things like that, which are essentially non-essential foods. They call them cash crops. These are the things that were encouraged by the neocolonial system without the balance of having agricultural produce that feeds its own nation. So think about it, you're a young farmer in the continent of Africa. You think, I'm going to farm coffee because I can export that. And that's great, fine. But if everybody does that, then what are we farming for our own people? And that's where the issue starts to come in. So this was encouraged by design through the process of colonialism. What happens then is that becomes part of the culture of that country, the identity of that country, and then that stays and proliferates for hundreds of years. Uganda is still known for its coffee, and coffee is its largest export. In fact, my partner, Medina, her whole family are coffee farmers. I often go out to their farm. We've even ventured together in some coffee business. And this is part of their identity now. This is part of who they are. Nobody sees this as nefarious. It's subtle because it's agriculture, it's farming, it's a good hard day's work. But the bigger picture is that of the planning and distribution of these types of crops. If Africa wants to improve, it must change the way it prioritizes what crops are grown. And this can be done at the government level with incentives. And this is where we get into the idea of food as a form of control. So you heard the quote that Moussa used, which is a Gaddafi quote, stating, "A nation that cannot feed itself is a nation waiting to be conquered." We're seeing this play out right now in Egypt, for example. They've had bread shortages, and bread would be a major staple for a place like Egypt. And that stuff is produced where? In Europe. The wheat for that bread is produced in Europe. So if you're reliant on another country for one of your staple foods, they now control you. This type of dependency has to be broken. He talks about how millions of acres of land across the continent of Africa have been given away for land deals. These are foreign interest controlled land deals, but they are able, much like the minerals industry, to extract crops and agricultural products out at very little or no charge, or as part of a debt deal. See, when countries get into debt binds, which we've spoken about many times on the channel, part of the payment and debt structure often involves things like exporting agricultural products, agricultural deals, land deals like this. So now you're getting pennies on the dollar, if anything, maybe even a net loss as part of a debt deal for the agricultural products that are being produced on your land, taking up space that could be used, again, to make your own crops for your own people, or to sell, package, add value, and sell them to the European market at a higher rate, capturing more of the value and bringing more finances and economic strength to your country. Sometimes some of these land deals means small subsistence farmers, average farmers are pushed off land, squeezed, or they're forced to sell what they have. And then you get this sort of non-natural farming practices, industrial farming practices with GMOs. I've spoken extensively on this channel about the stuff that Bill Gates is doing on the continent. Seed dependency, fertilizers that mean the land can't replenish itself, destroying the African ecosystems, making us dependent on synthetic fertilizer for the crops to grow whatsoever. This all makes the nutrient density of our foods much worse, it's less healthy, and there's even links to things like cancer. Another point he makes in the video is around what that food would do for the health of our people. If we're growing natural food on the continent of Africa and we're eating that natural food and it doesn't have all these GMOs and fertilizers and things in it, and it's the food that's locally produced, it works with the seasons, and we improve things like irrigation and farming infrastructure for sustainable farming, healthy farming, then our youth will grow strong. They will have access to cheap food because it's locally produced, and there will be food security. They might not be eating 5-star Michelin star dinners, but they will grow strong. They will add to the workforce. There'll be less mortality. Everyone will be healthier in general. I heard it said that over 100 years ago, the life expectancy in Africa was so high because it had not yet been introduced to sort of industrial sugars and modern practices.
Why is it that the colonialists came to Kenya? They found Kenyans consuming millet, sorghum. There was zero processed food in the country, but people were not dying of hunger. In fact, people were so healthy. In fact, the life expectancy of Kenya 100 years ago and Tanzania and most of Africa was a lot higher. Currently, the life expectancy of a country like Nigeria is 56 years old. The life expectancy of the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, it is 86 years old. So how is it that you have a whole 30 years difference? It means that in a country like Kenya, when our life expectancy was higher before the colonialists, one of the reasons was the food. It was a millet, it was a sorghum, it was that best starch that our people were consuming.
I noticed that here in Uganda, there's a whole lot of sugary, high carb, high corn fructose syrup stuff in the supermarkets. As the cities industrialize and get modernized with Western type sales practices, all of those products come in. But if you go out to the village, there's no obesity out there. They're eating the food they grow, they're eating the natural stuff. In the cities, you're starting to see diabetes, obesity, and all of these other issues that come in from quick processed foods. In fact, it's glamorized. Young girls want to be taken to KFC. And I know it's mad from a Western perspective, but KFC is seen as this Western restaurant that has good food. But that type of deep fried chicken, man, it's just not good for us. So the real revolution needs to happen in the policies of the governments of Africa. They need to recognize this understanding. This is what Moussa Ibrahim was advising Gaddafi about. We all need to take a leaf out of that book. We need to understand that the battlefield is not just in the minerals, it's in our agricultural systems here, especially when 60% of the world's arable land is in the continent of Africa. I'm going to leave you with this little conclusion that I've come up with here. If Africa is the breadbasket of the world, then why are we importing bread? The truth is, until we reclaim agriculture, all talk of independence is incomplete. What would it look like if Africa fed itself before it fed the world? That, ladies and gentlemen, is a true vision of sovereignty. I would love to know what you guys think about this. Let me know in the comments section. Did you know about the extent to which agriculture plays a part in colonial practices? But if you have nothing to say in the comments section, would it be too much for me to ask you to write the words African food sovereignty? It just lets me know that you watched the video to the end, you like what I'm doing, and you want me to continue. Thank you so much for watching this video today, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.